Have you ever felt like you're pushing through life, but everything inside you is quietly saying, stop? Not because you're lazy, not because you don't care, but because you're tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. You wake up with good intentions. You tell yourself, today I'll be different. And by 3 p.m., your energy is gone. Not physically, mentally, emotionally. Like your willpower just clocked out without telling you. Be honest. Does that feel familiar? Here's the part that stings. You don't actually want to quit. You just want the pressure to stop. You want the noise in your head to quiet down. You want to feel steady, certain, in control. But instead, you feel like you're constantly negotiating with yourself. Just one more day. Just one more try. Maybe tomorrow I'll feel stronger. And that's where the story begins. Not with a dramatic failure, not with some huge rock-bottom moment, but with quiet exhaustion. The kind nobody sees. The kind that makes you question your own strength. Now here's the uncomfortable realization. What if the thing draining you isn't your responsibilities, it's your resistance? Wait, let that sit. Because there's a difference between being overwhelmed and being at war with reality. Most people don't burn out because life is impossible. They burn out because they keep fighting what already is. You don't like your job. You resist it. You don't like where you're at financially. You resist it. You don't like how far behind you feel. So you resist that too. And resistance is heavy. It's like carrying a backpack filled with, this shouldn't be happening. No wonder you're tired. But this is where it gets interesting. The book we're walking through, Relentless, doesn't define relentlessness as grinding harder. It defines it as refusing to emotionally collapse when things don't go your way. That's different. Very different. Because maybe you don't need more motivation. Maybe you need emotional endurance, and those are not the same thing. Motivation is a spark. Endurance is a structure. And right now, your structure feels shaky. Here's a question most people avoid. When something goes wrong, what story do you immediately tell yourself? I knew this wouldn't work. Of course this happens to me. See, I'm not cut out for this. Why does your brain go there so fast? Why does it default to defeat? Think about it for a second. Because that reaction isn't random. It's trained. Somewhere along the way, you learned that struggle means stop, that friction means failure, that discomfort means danger. And so every time life pushes back, you interpret it as a sign to retreat. But what if friction isn't a warning sign? What if it's a strengthening phase? I used to think strong people just didn't feel doubt, like they were built differently, like they woke up confident. But here's the confession nobody likes to say out loud. Strong people feel the same fear. They just don't let it make the final decision. And that's where the shift begins. Not when fear disappears, but when it loses authority. Right now, fear has authority in your life. Fear of failing again, fear of looking stupid, fear of wasting time, fear of choosing wrong. So you hesitate, you overthink, you delay, and then you get frustrated at yourself for not moving. It's a loop, and loops are exhausting. But this next part changes everything. Relentless isn't about charging forward blindly. It's about developing a mind that doesn't crumble under discomfort, that doesn't interpret every setback as identity evidence, that doesn't say, this is hard, so I must not be capable. Instead, it says, this is hard, so I must be growing. That's a radical reframe, and your brain won't accept it easily, because if you adopt that belief, you lose your favorite escape route, quitting. Let's be honest, quitting feels relieving in the moment. It removes pressure. It restores comfort. but it quietly steals confidence. And the more times you quit, the more fragile you feel. Not because you're weak, but because you trained yourself to retreat. So here you are, not broken, not incapable, just conditioned. Conditioned to stop when things stretch you. But wait till you hear this. The problem isn't that you stop. It's why you stop. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. The real reason you stop isn't because the goal is impossible. It's because somewhere deep down, you tied your identity to the outcome. And that's heavy. Because now every attempt feels like a test of who you are. If it works, you're capable. If it fails, you're exposed. So of course you hesitate. Of course you overthink. You're not protecting the goal. You're protecting your ego. And here's where it gets real. Relentless isn't about forcing yourself to push through pain. It's about separating who you are from what happens. Read that again in your head. You are not the result. You are the effort. But we don't live like that. We live as if every setback is a verdict. You send the application and don't hear back. Verdict? Not good enough. You start a routine and miss 3 days. Verdict? I never stick to anything. You open up to someone and they pull away. Verdict? I'm too much. Why do we jump straight to self-judgment? Why does the brain treat temporary events like permanent labels? Why does this keep happening? Because your mind wants certainty. Even negative certainty feels safer than ambiguity. If you label yourself bad at this, at least it explains the discomfort. At least it closes the loop. But that explanation becomes a prison. And this is the part nobody tells you. The more you define yourself by outcomes, the more fragile your confidence becomes. It's like building your self-worth on shifting sand. One wave hits, and you're questioning everything. Now here's the emotional pivot. Relentless thinking says this: results fluctuate. Identity doesn't. You don't wake up a different person because something didn't work. You're still the same mind, the same potential, the same capacity to try again. But when you forget that, you start negotiating with your dreams. Maybe it's not for me. Maybe I should lower my expectations. Maybe I'm just not that type of person. Be honest. Have you said something like that recently? Not out loud, but internally, quietly. That subtle shrinking of ambition, that softening of belief. That's not maturity. That's fear wearing logic as a disguise. And here's the twist. Fear sounds reasonable. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It says, be realistic. But sometimes realistic is just code for comfortable. Now don't misunderstand. This isn't about reckless persistence. It's about emotional stability in the face of uncertainty. There's a huge difference. You don't have to chase every dream blindly, but you do have to stop collapsing every time things don't go smoothly. Let me say something that might sting a little. You're not exhausted from trying. You're exhausted from doubting. Doubt drains more energy than effort ever will. Because doubt runs in the background all day. Is this worth it? Am I wasting time? What if I fail again? That mental noise is heavy, and it makes even small actions feel massive. So you procrastinate. Not because you don't care, but because action feels emotionally risky. If you don't try, you can't fail. If you don't start, you can't be judged. It feels safe, until it doesn't. Because avoidance has a cost. It erodes self-trust. Every time you delay something important, you send yourself a message. I don't follow through. And identity listens.
Here's a quiet challenge. Think about one thing you've been avoiding. Not the biggest thing, just one. You know exactly what it is. What story are you telling yourself about it? That you're not ready? That you need more time? That it's not urgent? Or is it that you're afraid of what it might reveal about you? Most people won't admit that part. I didn't either for a long time. I used to think I just needed better time management, better systems, better productivity hacks. But the truth? I was scared of finding out I wasn't as capable as I hoped. That's the real fear. Not failure, exposure. And that's why relentlessness starts internally. It's not about grinding harder. It's about becoming emotionally unshaken by imperfect results. When you detach identity from outcome, something powerful happens. You start seeing setbacks as data, not definitions. This didn't work becomes information, not indictment. And that small shift changes how long you're willing to stay in the game. Because now, a bad day doesn't mean a bad life. A mistake doesn't mean you're a mistake. And that distinction? That's freedom. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. If you stop using outcomes to define yourself, you also lose excuses. You can't say, "It didn't work, so I'm done." You have to decide again, and again, and again. That repetition? That's the real work.
That repetition is where most people break. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's boring. Nobody talks about that part. We glamorize the breakthrough. We post the transformation. We celebrate the finish line. But the middle? The quiet, repetitive, unexciting middle? That's where identity is forged. And this is where relentless gets uncomfortable, because it suggests something you might not like. You don't need a new plan. You need a stronger nervous system. Let that land. Your goals aren't collapsing because they're impossible. They're collapsing because your emotions spike every time progress slows down. You interpret delay as danger. You interpret silence as rejection. You interpret confusion as incompetence. And your body reacts accordingly. Tension, anxiety, restlessness. So you retreat to comfort. Scroll, snack, sleep, distract. And then you feel guilty, which makes the next attempt even heavier. It's not laziness, it's emotional mismanagement. And here's the question nobody asks. What if discomfort isn't a signal to stop, but a signal to stabilize? Think about going to the gym. Your muscles shake under weight, but shaking doesn't mean injury. It means adaptation. So why, when your mind shakes under pressure, do you assume something is wrong? Why do you assume you're not built for it? Is this you right now? Pushing a little, then pulling back the second it feels uncertain? Relentlessness, in its purest form, is emotional steadiness. Not aggression, not intensity. Steadiness. The ability to stay grounded while your results fluctuate. That's rare. Because most people are addicted to immediate validation. If it doesn't work fast, they panic. If they're not praised, they doubt. If progress isn't obvious, they assume regression. But growth rarely feels like growth. It feels like repetition. And repetition feels invisible, which is why so many people quit right before momentum builds. Now here's the surprising part. You don't build confidence by winning. You build confidence by staying. By showing up on days when you don't feel inspired. By finishing things when they stop being exciting. By continuing after embarrassment. Confidence isn't a reward, it's a byproduct. And that changes everything. Because if confidence comes after action, then waiting to feel confident before acting makes no sense.
It's like waiting to feel strong before lifting weights. Backward. And yet we all do it. I'll start when I feel ready. I'll try again when I feel motivated. But readiness is earned in motion. Motivation is created in progress. So here's the emotional pivot. Instead of asking, "Do I feel like it?" start asking, "Can I tolerate the discomfort of doing it anyway?" That's a different question, and it puts you back in control. Because now it's not about excitement, it's about capacity, and capacity grows through exposure. Let's pause for something honest. How many times have you quit something not because you couldn't do it, but because you couldn't handle how it made you feel? The awkwardness, the slowness, the uncertainty. That's the battlefield, not the task itself. And once you see that clearly, you stop personalizing the struggle. You stop saying, "I'm bad at this," and start saying, "This feels uncomfortable." Huge difference. One attacks identity, the other acknowledges sensation. And sensations pass, identity lingers. Now here's where it gets powerful. When you stop running from discomfort, you gain emotional leverage. You become harder to shake, harder to discourage, harder to derail. Not because you're numb, but because you're stable. And stability creates clarity. Clarity creates better decisions. Better decisions create momentum. Momentum builds belief. Belief reinforces identity. And suddenly, you're not trying to be relentless. You just are. But this next part changes everything. Relentlessness isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the decision to continue without announcing it, without dramatizing it, without turning it into a personality trait. It's simply consistency under pressure. And most people underestimate how powerful that is, because they're looking for intensity. But intensity burns out. Stability sustains. So the real question becomes this: are you chasing emotional highs or building emotional endurance? One feels exciting, the other feels slow, but only one survives friction. And friction is inevitable. Life will test you, not once, repeatedly. The difference now? You're starting to see the test for what it is, not a verdict, a strengthening phase.
Here's the moment everything shifts. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this building in me?" That single question turns chaos into training, because now setbacks aren't interruptions, they're repetitions. And repetition builds resilience. But let's be honest, there's a part of you that still wants ease, still wants a clean path, still wants reassurance that it'll all work out. Of course you do. You're human. But here's the quiet truth. Certainty is overrated. It makes you soft. It makes you dependent on smooth conditions, and smooth conditions don't last. So when friction shows up, you panic. But what if friction is the constant? What if unpredictability is the baseline? Then your job isn't to eliminate chaos, it's to stay steady inside it. That's what being relentless actually means. It means your effort is no longer controlled by mood. Your consistency is no longer controlled by praise. Your identity is no longer controlled by outcomes. It means you decide who you are before the results arrive. And that's power. But here's where it gets personal. There's something in your life right now that feels stuck. A goal, a relationship, a habit, a version of yourself you keep trying to become. And every time you move toward it, resistance shows up. Doubt, delay, distraction. And you interpret that resistance as a sign to slow down. But what if resistance is simply proof that it matters? What if the discomfort is proportional to the growth? Think about it. The things you don't care about don't scare you. They don't challenge you. They don't expose you. So the very intensity of your fear might be evidence of your potential. Is that uncomfortable to admit? Good. Because here's the final realization. Relentlessness isn't about force. It's about self-trust. When you trust yourself to keep going, you stop fearing temporary pain. When you trust yourself to adapt, you stop fearing wrong turns. When you trust yourself to stay, you stop fearing failure. Because failure only becomes final when you disappear. And you're still here, still listening, still searching for clarity. That matters. Let's have one honest moment. If nothing changed in your external world, but you became emotionally steadier, how different would your life feel? Not perfect, but lighter, less reactive, less dramatic, more controlled? Because most suffering isn't from circumstances, it's from interpretation, and interpretation is trainable. That's the gift in all of this. You can train your mind to endure. You can train your nervous system to stay calm under pressure. You can train your identity to separate effort from outcome. That's not hype. That's psychology. And once you realize that, you stop waiting for life to feel easier. You start becoming stronger. Now here's the quiet ending nobody expects. Relentlessness doesn't look heroic. It looks ordinary. It looks like getting up again. It looks like trying again. It looks like finishing what you started even when it's no longer exciting. It looks like not making a dramatic exit every time things get hard. It's subtle, but over time it compounds. Days become weeks, weeks become months, and one day you look back and realize you didn't quit. And because you didn't quit, you changed. Not instantly, not dramatically, but deeply. So here's the takeaway. Stop trying to eliminate discomfort. Start expanding your capacity to handle it. Stop chasing constant motivation. Start building emotional steadiness. Stop asking whether you feel ready. Stop asking whether you're willing to stay. Because staying, that's the superpower. And if this hits something in you, don't just scroll past it. Sit with it. Let it challenge you. Let it strengthen you. And if you want more conversations like this, the kind that make you think instead of just react, stay close. Choose growth over escape, and start becoming the person who doesn't fold when life pushes back.